My name is Adam Moskowitz. I work for MathWorks, but I do not represent them here, although what I'm talking about today is based on work that I am doing with my group at MathWorks. So this is vision and a view of it, but this is not an official representation of the company. Now that I've got that out of the way. I'm going to spend about the next 40 minutes, 35 minutes, whatever, talking about my vision of what the future of system administration is going to be, and a question for you to contemplate if you believe my vision of the future. Some people have already talked about this in some of the other talks. Vish touched on a little bit of it in his keynote yesterday, and somebody earlier this morning talked about some things related to it. I'm going to take the vision and ideas that they're going a bit further than that. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't predict the future, but as I said, everything I'm talking about here is based on actual work that we are doing and is really my group's plans for our sort of software development for the next 1 to 2 years. When I started, question? I know. Oh, sorry. There's nothing to project. That's okay. When I started in 1974, I was called a programmer. And by that, I mean applications programmer, not systems programmer. I had nothing to do with the computers themselves. I wrote applications for users, and I was just a programmer. The word sysadmin hadn't been invented yet, and whatever they called people who did sysadmin back then, I don't know, but I wasn't one of those. In 1987, I became what we currently think of as the system administrator, doing all the usual stuff: backups, machines, installations, users, all the good things that sysadmins do. In 2007, I went back to being a programmer, although this time they called me a software engineer or a developer. And in 2012, I started concentrating on software specifically for system administration. In 2013, I got a job with MathWorks working on that kind of project, and that's what's got me to where we are today. Since 1974, there have been huge changes in hardware. The machine that I started working on took up about half this room. It had a 0.27 megahertz processor. Processor is not a fair word. The processor itself was the size of 2 refrigerators. It had 16 kilobytes of core. That's what we used to call RAM. And it had a whopping pair of half megabyte disks. Your average iPhone today, depending on how you measure it, is between 1,000 and 1,000,000 times more powerful than that computer, and it fits in your pocket. Sysadmin has gone through similar changes, I think just as large, but they're harder to quantify. It's hard to say, well, we used to do something this big and it's now, but sysadmin has gone through changes that size. I believe that the rate of change for hardware is slowing down, but I believe that the rate of change for system administration is speeding up, and I don't think it's a linear speed up. I think it's getting exponentially faster, or bigger, or more complicated, or however you want to measure it. Sometime in the next 2 or 5 or 10 years, I predict that we're going to see even bigger changes in sysadmin than we've already seen. If your company's product is software, I think you're going to see that change probably in about 2 years. For everybody else, 5 to 10 years, maybe a little slower for places like .edu, maybe a little faster for some other places. But what you're doing as a sysadmin now, whether you like it or not, whether you do anything or not, and whether you agree with my vision of the future, but things are going to change for sysadmins. So get ready for it. The software that my group is working on is going to make a fundamental change in how the sysadmins at MathWorks administer servers. Currently, they do all the things that you expect. A developer calls up and says, we need a new integration environment. They say, okay, fine, how many VMs do you want in it? They spin up 5, 6, 8 VMs, whatever it is. They set it aside, they configure a network, and that group uses that set of VMs for however long. And when they're done, they send mail to the sysadmin group saying, okay, we're done with it, please tear it down. I'm going to completely change that for my users. Other companies are writing software that's similar to this. Some have already done it. Places like Netflix are doing these kinds of things, although sort of different focus than what I'm on. Other companies, I believe, are going to do this as a product. And I think that in the next 2 to 5 years, you're going to be able to go out and buy software that matches more or less what I'm talking about here today. And you're going to install that software, and rather than dealing with servers the way you have been, you're going to deal with servers through a couple of very simple web pages, click a few buttons, and servers are going to appear and disappear. By the way, servers, virtual machines. They're still going to be hardware. That's not going away. Although for some people, maybe it's all going to go to the cloud. MathWorks happens to be a mix of internal machines and cloud, so we sort of do some of both. Wait a minute, yeah. The thing that I think is really missing in system administration today is real automation. Now, we're using things like Chef and Puppet and all of those good things, and I think they're good, but I consider those force multipliers rather than real automation, because somebody still has to create the machine, somebody still has to put that machine's entry into a Puppet file somewhere, or whatever it is. I'm using Puppet because that happens to be what we've got. Nothing against the others. And somebody, in effect, has to say, hey, Puppet config software, whatever it is, go build that machine for me. And when you're done, you have to say, okay, I'm done. Hey, VMware system, go turn that machine off. Everything that happens on those machines, except for somebody edits a file and Puppet fixes it for you, all that stuff has to happen because either a sysadmin or a developer says, make this change for me. Now, Puppet lets you say, make this change everywhere, but somebody still somewhere has to say, make this change, or here are new changes to make. To me, that's not automation. What I think about with automation is the entire life cycle of the VM, from its creation to its destruction and everything that happens in between. What group it goes into, what Puppet modules get applied to it, what software gets loaded on it, how it talks to other software, the network around it, how the network's configured to talk to the machine, and how the machine's configured to talk to the network will be 100% automated using the software that we're working on. Yeah?
Is your software called Skynet?
No. No. Our software is, no. Some of you are probably saying, so why do I care about automating the creation and deletion of machines? Because for a lot of people, creating new machines is not something you do very often. So MathWorks is a software company. We've got 2 traditional software products. By traditional, I mean you buy them, you download them, you install them on your machine, and it runs there. We have a small handful of web applications and a very small handful of cloud applications. Every one of those products is built of anywhere between 2 and 200, let's call them modules. And every one of those modules has a stack of tests higher than I can count. We've got the standard unit tests, we've got functional tests, system tests, integration tests, you name it. And a typical system, piece of a system, if you go from one end to the other on a dedicated machine, the testing takes 2 to 3 days to run if you do the entire suite. We're talking about a lot of testing. That takes a really long time. The place where it gets really hard is integration testing. So I have 5 applications that cooperate with each other, and in order to do an integration test, I have to bring up an environment of 5 VMs, install software A on machine A, software B on machine B, get them all configured, and then say, oh, so we're testing software B, take the old version of software B off, install my new test version, and run the integration test. That process takes, if you're lucky, a couple of hours. The integration tests take 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that. But I have to stand up machines, I have to stand up 5 machines for every integration test. And so rather than do that every time a developer wants to run an integration test, we have 5 integration environments that just sit there doing nothing, waiting for developers to run integration tests. The problem is we have 205 groups trying to use that, because every application is trying to integrate their stuff. And even if it's only the 5 groups that are doing stuff, they've still got to play with each other's software, and somebody updates one, so you now have to go update that version of the software and all the other clusters. It just gets ugly. And so rather than these being nice, clean integration tests, what happens is you're doing your integration tests on a moving target, that you're testing whatever was installed in the integration environment today, and you hope that's what's going out the door. And so what it means is before we can actually release our software, we do have to build a brand new pristine integration environment and run the test where we know the exact version of every piece of software in there, otherwise bugs are going to get passed, and that's a pain in the butt. So what I want to do is have the developers check in their code and have the system say, oh, he's ready to run integration tests, and my software will talk to VMware and say, I need 5 VMs, please. Poof, here they are. The 5 VMs get configured for networking, for Puppet, for storage, for all the appropriate stuff. The latest appropriate version of all the software gets installed, the integration tests get run, and when we're done, it reports the results back to the software, to the developer, and destroys the machines. So every time the developer checks in a code change, if it gets through the unit tests and it gets through the functional tests and says, we're ready for integration tests, they get a brand new environment that does the job that they need, guaranteed to have the right versions of software. So how are we doing this stuff so that the developers can say, I know that I want to test against this version, I know that I want to test against that version? We're mostly a Java shop, and so as you might expect, we use Maven, and Maven has this thing called a POM file, which is basically a way of specifying dependencies. The developer says, my software depends on version 1.1 of application A and version 7.1 of application B, and on, and every time they run their tests, they get version 1.1 of app A and version 7.1 of B, or whatever it is, and they never have to worry about, did the sysadmin install the right thing? Did the golden image of that VM have the right stuff installed? It's installed by our software automatically based on what the developer asks for. If the integration test succeeds, our software actually saves a clean copy of the machine and says, okay, here's the 7.11 ready for the next time somebody wants it, but it doesn't actually get used until the developers say, we trust 7.11 enough to use that version. All of this happens through Maven plugins. The software developers don't see anything. The sysadmins not only don't see anything, they don't even know the machines are being created and destroyed. Because the only time the sysadmins are aware that the VMs are there is when the monitoring software says, hey, this VM server is getting a little bit overloaded, it's probably time to buy a new one. Yes, I work for a privately funded company, and when we run out of resources, we just buy more. It's kind of nice. So all of this happens by the developers doing things, and what the developers do is write software. The developers don't care about the machines coming and going. The sysadmins love it because they just wait for the software developers to do something, and they watch the machines happily come and go and don't have to do machines. So the sysadmins, they still do some stuff, but they've gotten completely out of the path of what the developers do. I really like that. The Maven stuff is run via a continuous integration tool that's similar to Jenkins. We built our own before Jenkins existed and just can't really convert at this point, but you could pretend I'm using Jenkins. And the idea is that you have something that sits there, watches for the developer to check in a code change, and it says, oh, I've got tests to run, and spins up test machines, and off they go. So, where am I going with this? That's why I care about automation, right? I have 500 developers, something like that. I don't know, some ridiculously large part of my company are developers. And in the groups that I'm supporting alone, there are about 55 developers. And they are each working on applications, and the average developer is running integration tests once a day. And once a day, once the software gets in place, once a day, a group of 5 to 8 machines per developer will come into being, have software loaded, and be destroyed, and repeat the process. And the sysadmins just sit back and go, gosh, isn't life nice? I don't have to do anything. Stupid developers, let them do whatever they want. Because as it is now, we call them up and say, hey guys, we need 6 more integration environments. And they go, yeah, okay, how about tomorrow? That's why I care about automating machines, and that's why I'm writing software to do this. Now, as something that, Liz, I think you talked about in your code thing, this same system is used for testing sysadmin changes. Why not? I've got Puppet code. I make a Puppet code change. I check in that code into the development branch, and a VM spins up, and we see that the VM gets the Puppet code applied to it. And when the Puppet unit tests and Puppet functional tests are run, you all are writing unit tests and functional tests for your CM stuff, right? Right? You will be. It does the same process. It spins up a VM, sees that it works, great, put it away. If it works, we save a copy of it. But what if I broke something for the application developer? Well, in my Puppet POM file, because we've extended Maven to way beyond just Java, I can specify all of the integration tests for all of the applications that I want to run when I make a change to Puppet code. And so I make a change to Puppet that does something kind of low level on a machine, and all of a sudden, those group of 5 to 8 VMs spin up again and run the integration tests and see that the integration tests, A, start, and B, pass. And I know that my Puppet change not only didn't break anything on the machine, but didn't break the developer's code. And so it doesn't matter whether you're developing Puppet stuff or whether you're developing software, it goes through the same integration environment. And even you as a sysadmin don't have to do any more work to test that than the developers do. You check it in, it all happens automatically. One of the other things that's nice about this is if you think about the process I described, bring up a machine, configure it, do something to it, turn it off. That's really the same as deploying the machine, right? Bring the machine up, do something to it, and leave it running. And the difference is, in one case, I do something to it on this little private network here, and in deployment, I do something to it in the real network. But it's the same process. We check in a code change, and in this case, the code change is more pushing the button that says, OK to release, and automatically, new machines spin up with the new versions of software. The old machines are torn down. We have load balancers and auto-scaling groups to handle all the tricky stuff. But it just works. And the deployment process, it will be the exact same as the process to bring up machines for integration environments. It's just a couple of different parameters, which, by the way, are mostly in Puppet files. So we get to test those as well. For those of you who are shall we say, jaded sysadmins, I'm willing to bet that you've at some point during this talk said, yeah, but what about something, because I've skipped something. I skipped a lot of details, right? There are a lot of things that we have to deal with here, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong, and there are lots of things that you're going, yeah, but what about this, what about that? The one thing that I want you to remember in terms of mindset is, yes, I know that this project is going to take me 1 to 2 years, and I know that at the end of that 2 years, there are still going to be things that I've missed. And I'm willing to bet that any one of you could come up to me and say, what about X? And I'll go, yeah, I didn't think about that one either. I don't care. And I'll tell you why I don't care. I've been writing software for a really long time, and I know that with enough work, I can get software to do pretty much anything we want it to do. And all of those things where people say, yeah, but what about this or what about that? That's just another requirement. It's called agile software development. Somebody says, by the way, your software doesn't do this, or by the way, your software needs to be improved to do that. We're like, okay, fine, that's our next project. That's our next sprint. We'll make the software do it. The difference in attitude, mindset, whatever, is I have to develop software and give it to my, I have to develop software to give to my developers, yeah. I write software to help other people write software. That doesn't, my mother doesn't understand that. I give my developers something, and I give them anything, and it's better than what they've got now. And so I can keep improving it as I go. I don't have to describe the perfect system today as long as I believe I can get to the perfect system a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So all those things they're saying to self of, yeah, but he forgot about this. Yeah, I did, but we'll get there. It's okay. I think they call this agile development or something, I don't know. So my sysadmins used to have to get calls from developers and say, I need development environments. They used to have to tear those development environments down when they were done. They used to have to install new versions of software and test operating systems and all of that. And now they don't do so much, right? They sit around and wait for something to break. And every so often they edit a Puppet file to change the version of, you know, an OS or test something there. And what's left for them to do? And the answer is not much. I'm not actually trying to put my sysadmins out of a job, but I am trying to make them bored. So one of the other bits that the sysadmins you would think deal with is, so I remember I said we go out and buy hardware when we need it. So they have to install the new hardware, right? Well, yeah, somebody, a human, is going to have to rack and stack the thing. But all of the work that most people think about of configuring new VM servers, that's also handled by a slightly different version of our software, because rather than edit a file, you click a web page, you go to a web page that says, here's the rack location, here are the power outlets, here's the network outlets, go configure this. And if you think about it, configuring the server that's running the VMs is really no different than configuring the VMs themselves. My software handles this, or my software will handle this. And so now oh great, we get to install a machine and I actually get to touch something is reduced to, yeah, I get to put in a few screws and click a button on a web page. So is that really all that is left? Oh, yeah. The one question that people sometimes say is, so what about Apache, or what about Glassfish, or what about the actual application things that we sometimes need to mess with? My sysadmins do not touch the versions of Apache or Tomcat or Glassfish or anything that has to do with the application because the developers do it. And the last time I said that to a sysadmin, the first response I got from him was something that, unlike Nathan, I am not going to repeat in class. But it was in effect, are you crazy? I don't have to care that my software developers can arbitrarily say, hey, we're going to go to Apache 3 or whatever ridiculous version, or we're going to go from Java 1.1 to Java 1.7. I don't have to care because when they check in that change, it runs this long series of integration tests and everything happens, and either the tests fail and they go, whoops, that was a bad idea, don't do that, and they roll it back, or they change their software to work with it, or it passes the tests. And in either case, it either doesn't get released or it gets tested and it does get released. And if it gets released and it still fails, they get paged, not me. I don't have to care if they screw up Apache. I don't have to care if they screw up the version of Apache. I don't have to care if they screw up the configuration, if they do the wrong thing with Glassfish. Not my problem, not my sysadmin's problem anymore, because the developers made the change. The developers will fix the change if they screwed something up. So one less thing for my developers to do. Is there anything left for the developers to do other than physically racking and stacking the hardware? What's that?
You're saying developers.
Sorry, yes, developers. Is there anything left for the sysadmins to do? So if I'm the person sitting there writing all this software to do the system administration, right, taking all the stuff that the sysadmins used to do, am I now a sysadmin? And my argument is yes. And the future of sysadmin for things like servers, and I think for large parts of your environment, is going to stop being whatever you currently consider system administration and is going to become software development. And when I say software development, I am not talking about learn Ruby or learn Perl and learn a few coding things. I am talking about real full-blown software development. You're going to study algorithms, you're going to study proper coding methods, you're going to study how to do test-driven development, you're going to study how to write, study or learn how to write testable code. It's one thing to write unit tests, it's another thing to write code that can be tested. There are two different problems there. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. You're going to learn how to write readable code. You're going to learn to do code reviews. You're going to learn to do design reviews. You're going to learn to do proper branching and version control and agile development and writing and reading and using APIs and all the stuff that goes along with being a software developer for software products. All the stuff that you want your developers to do so that your product is something that people are actually willing to use rather than say, that buggy piece of shit, I'm not buying that. Now, yes, you're going to have to learn some languages, and in addition to some of the languages like Perl and Python, you're probably going to need to learn C or C++. You're probably going to need to learn something like Java, and you're going to need to learn new languages. Learn to learn new languages. Because every so often somebody's going to say, so we've got this cool system and it works, but the tool that we use it with happens to be written in Haskell, and you're going to need to learn Haskell because we've got to use this as part of our development. And it's not, that doesn't fit with the attitude that I've seen some sysadmins have, which is, why can't we just do it all in shell and be done with it? Or if Perl was good enough for Larry Wall, it ought to be good enough for the rest of us. That doesn't fly in software development. And I've heard some number of sysadmins and some number of developers legitimately complain about object-oriented programming. Guess what, guys? It's real and it gets used, and if it's done properly, it works well. You're going to need to learn to do object-oriented programming. If this sounds like I've just described a bachelor's in computer science, I sort of have, although I'm not claiming that a bachelor's is strictly necessary. But if you've got no background in software development, getting a bachelor's in computer science may be the fastest way to get to be a software developer. But if you want to continue to be a sysadmin, if you want to be the sysadmin who does something other than rack and stack hardware and occasionally edit a text file to say, oh, we want this version of an operating system, and occasionally click a web page that says, let's put in a new server, you're going to need to stop doing what you're doing for sysadmin and become a software developer. And so the question that I'd like you to contemplate for your future is, Do you want to be the sysadmin that racks and stacks hardware and sits around and does nothing much else? Or do you want to be the guy that writes this? Do you want to be the sysadmin of either gender that writes the software that does what we do with sysadmin today? And I claim that if you're smart, you'll take the programming job because there's a whole lot more fun in that than sitting around clicking a few buttons and racking and stacking hardware. Nothing against racking and stacking hardware. I actually like doing it. It's a nice way to get away from how am I going to solve this programming problem. It's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So if you believe my vision of the future, that is that sysadmin is going to turn into software development, then I think you really need to find a way to become a software developer and start that now, because if you start now, you've got a reasonable chance of being ready to do it by the time that there's lots more software to be written. I will take questions.
I want to be contrary here.
No, go ahead.
What I'm hearing from you is that you're saying that.
So in our environment, we are building systems that are used for running tests, but the same mechanism is how we release our software into production for things.
Maybe it's semantic compliance.
So all of the testing things are automated, and they're automated by the developers.
What I'm trying to understand is maybe I'm mislabeling who does these other things that I consider system administration jobs.
Vetting builds is done by the developers and the testing system, and the sysadmins aren't involved in that because even now when it's not automated, whether a piece of software is released or not is determined by the product manager, and one of the inputs that the product manager uses to decide whether the build is allowed to go out.
I'm not even talking about the build of the product. I'm talking about the build of some. There's got to be a prototype system that they.
Yes, but the process of doing that is all software. It's software and very small recipes. So I write the software. The sysadmin writes the initial recipe, but that initial recipe to say what packages go onto the file, is that the kind of thing you're talking about? That is a text file that's about 20 lines long. So there's no challenge left in that one. And actually the developers can do the rest of it. So the sysadmin says, you need NTP, you need LDAP, you need this, that, and the other. Hey, developer, here, put whatever else you want on the machine because it's your machine, it runs your software. So there's really not much left to do. Security compliance. Security at our company is part of each of the development groups. So the software itself is what's made secure. At the same vein, there are people in the sysadmin team who look at security, but again, they are just looking and saying, nope, that's the wrong version of such and such a thing. We know there's a bug in it. You have to update that version. So does that answer what the missing pieces you think that are there?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
So who sets up the LDAP server and the ACC server and all that stuff?
The sysadmin, well, the software does it. Well, in any time there's a server to be set up, the VM is launched by somebody pushing a button that says launch a server that has this software load on it. Who pushes that button is effectively the product manager for whatever the area is, and there is somebody in the sysadmin group who is the equivalent of the product manager that says, we need a new LDAP server, or we need a new server for, say, Kerberos that we didn't previously have. But the process of doing it, again, is somebody builds up the little recipe that causes the machine to be created, runs the tests, it's like, okay, here's a machine ready to be released, pushes the button, presto, it's out there. Does that make sense?
And yet, in all of this, sysadmin keeps popping up.
I'm not saying sysadmins go away. I'm not proposing that system administrator. Yes, but and you'll notice at no point did I say system administration goes away. What I said is system administrators change their skill set, right? I'm not suggesting that we're getting rid of sysadmins. And there is still some stuff that's not going to be automated for quite some time. And notice I was talking about purely server side. There's still some user side stuff. But my main point is that a lot of the challenging work in system administration is moving from what we do now to writing software. Question in the back? Sure.
The comment, so we're
Well, and to be fair, the skill has changed from knowing how to edit the NTP file to knowing what should go into the NTP file and not caring how it gets there. And there's a difference there, but there is still knowledge required if you need to know what should be in the file, but you no longer have to edit the thing by hand. Also, you touched on capacity planning. One of the things that we are working on in conjunction with this software is lots and lots of monitoring. One of the things that we are monitoring is, as I said, how heavily utilized our VM servers are and how heavily utilized our cloud stuff is so that we know what our bill's going to look like at the end of the month. And in both cases, there are reports that are delivered that says, you're running at this capacity, here's how long things take, and somebody says, oh, gee, we should probably make that go faster, or we've got money to spend, let's go buy more servers, or, you know, we're spending an awful lot in the cloud, let's see if we can find a way to dial that back. But the capacity planning, the hard part of it, which is gathering the data, has been reduced to software. There's still humans making the decisions about when to buy more hardware, but the hard part of it, of figuring out how quickly it's growing, how fast your demand is ramping up, all of that's getting reduced to software. You had a question?
It sounds like what you're proposing is that systems administration is just becoming software.
Well, but yes, but my point is that sysadmins today, the average sysadmin today does not have the software engineering skills to do either sysadmin programming or embedded programming or application development, and those are the skills that underlie all of those things. So yes, there's specialization once you become or once you gain software development skills, but for an awful lot of sysadmins, the only way you're going to get to do those things is to gain those software development skills and then get the specialization. And again, I'm not suggesting system administration goes away. I'm simply suggesting that to remain a system administrator, you are going to need a very different set of skills. Maybe you throw out the ones you have, maybe you just increase it, but you're going to need to learn a lot of new stuff. Question?
It sounds like what you're forecasting is a lot of the same changes in telecom went through skill set. We're just making
Well,
sure.
well, that's my point. Is that it's for most people, it's not enhancing a skill set; it's learning a completely new one. That most system administrators that I know are capable of writing programs. Most system administrators that I know are not capable of doing software development in what would be considered a traditional software development environment with things like code reviews and proper API writing and things like that. And so that's the skill you need to learn. And how you do that, I can think of any number of ways. I'm self-taught. I know lots of people with degrees that learned it that way, apprenticeships, whatever it is. But it's not just a little bit of coding. It's learning a whole new set of skills that happen to be based on coding but go way beyond that. I think I've got time for one. Yeah.
The one thing I'm a little hung up on, I guess, is that
I don't know if you heard at the very beginning of the talk, but one of the things I said is that the software I'm writing is changing the server administration within the company. There are still sysadmins that are dealing with core services like email and user support and those kinds of things. Those will change eventually. I'm less confident about how they will change, but I believe that a lot of the things that will happen will move towards more software. It's basically anything that can be automated, I think will be. And in this case, automation is converted from a user process to a program that does it. Exactly how it's going to happen or what it's going to look like outside of managing servers, I'm less sure about. But I believe that it will look something like this. And if we come back in 2 or 5 years, I can probably do this talk for the other bit of sysad or the rest of sysadmin. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm betting it's going to look like software. Yeah.
I think I have an interesting perspective on this because when I started,
I don't think it's too early. It's the quote about the future's here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
It's here at my company. I mean, this is what we're doing. We've actually already written the pilot to do this, and at least one of our groups already has this running multiple times a day. It's running in a very crude form, but their integration tests happen 100% automated, and when they want to change something, they change their POM file.
right.
Yeah, Tom.
I'll just, since we're kind of like where you are.
So that brings up one interesting point that I'll use before I get out of here. The group that I'm working for is a software development group. We are not, the people in my group some of us have been system administrators, but we were not hired as system administrators. We were hired as software developers. We're actually a tools group, and we work on lots of tools. We happen to also work on tools that do system administration, but our focus is software development, not system administration. So we're not the ones having to make that change. It's more that what they've said to the group is, hey, go apply your skills to that area, and oh, by the way, since half the team already knows what that area looks like, me and one of the other guys, they said you can figure out the rest, go forth and write sysadmin software, but it's still writing software. We're not a sysadmin group per se. That's all we've got time for. There's a break coming up right now. Then there's lightning talks directly through there. You'll see me standing up the front again. If you have any questions about this, feel free to talk to me at the break or afterwards. And my email address is somewhere in the USB key. Feel free to send me mail if you want. And think about what kind of sysadmin you want to be going forward.